comments. I want to thank the Attorney General Stein for being here with us and for Representative Bolt. You for being here today for this important press conference. I want to thank the Attorney General. Explain more about the Survivor Act and how it's Linda, who's a person who has a personal story to share, and so Ms. Linda, if you
Thank you. Good morning. The Survivor Act has been instrumental in the healing of victims and to survivors. It has been a phenomenal success in clearing cold cases. We must be diligent as we strive to protect the rights of victims. We should not ever allow rape kits to sit untested. Do not shell human beings. We must protect the integrity of all rape kits. Each kit matters. Rape kits contain crucial evidence needed to send a predator to prison. Each rape kit represents the essence of a human being. That human being, male or female, is somebody's baby. No matter the age of that human being, he or she will always be somebody's baby. The potential of a sexual assault happening is from the cradle to the grave. It is a violent, life-threatening event, and it can happen to anyone at any time. Study the arrest records of known offenders. You will see the repetitive and insidious pattern of an offender. A rapist will never stop unless we stop him. Test kits. Arrest offenders. Empower victims to heal. Humanity. Humanity is the principle we must live by and honor. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Linda. I just want to start by saying that for many survivors of sexual assault, justice never comes. In North Carolina, fewer than 1 in 4 defendants charged with sexual assault are convicted. In 2016, members of the General Assembly were approached concerning a backlog of sexual assault evidence collection kits, often called rape kits, that had accumulated under the leadership of then Attorney General Roy Cooper. When a rape kit sits on the shelves and aren't tested for DNA, survivors don't get to see justice. We knew we had to do something. So in 2017, the General Assembly directed local law enforcement agencies and the Department of Justice to conduct an audit of how many kits were sitting untested across the state. The results were shocking. More than 15,000 kits were untested and had accumulated under AG Cooper's leadership. 15,000. That amount is staggering and should never have been allowed to happen. This wasn't the first time our state was making headlines for having a rape kit backlog under AG Cooper. But the General Assembly, in cooperation with Attorney General Stein, determined that this would be the last time that it happened. We knew our Department of Justice could not continue to ignore the problem and utter hollow promises to never forget those rape victims who need to have their kits tested. As it is often said, justice delayed is justice denied. Since learning the magnitude of the backlog, the General Assembly and the Department of Justice have made strides not only to fund rape kit testing, but also to put in place measures to ensure those kits that need to be tested are tested. In 2019, the General Assembly provided millions of dollars to reduce the backlog and passed the Survivor Act, which required all sexual assault evidence kits to be reported to law enforcement within 24 hours. That report would then start the clock for law enforcement agency to begin investigating the assault and to submit their kit for testing. It also required testing of all rape kits for DNA, and that piece is absolutely critical. Since the state started testing the backlog rape kits that were languishing on our shelves, our law enforcement officers and DAs have been able to bring long-awaited justice to many sexual assault survivors across North Carolina, as Attorney General Stein will highlight in his remarks. It's one thing to promise to never forget the survivors of sexual assault, but it's another thing to act on that promise. So I want to thank the many legislators who worked on this bill, Senator Britt, who couldn't be here today, Representative Bowles, Representative Carson Smith, Representative John Fairclough, and Representative Billy Richardson and others for working together to address this problem. I also want to thank Attorney General Stein and the Department of Justice for the work they've done. As a result of this collaboration, we've been able to chip away at the backlog and to make numerous arrests in cases that had long thought to be unsolvable. So at this time, I'd like to introduce Attorney General Josh Stein. Josh.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here, Senator Daniel. Thank you for hosting this press conference to discuss this most important issue of eliminating the backlog of untested sexual assault kits. Senator Daniel, Senator Britt, Representative Bowles, Representative Richardson, Representative Smith, Representative Belk, Representative John. There have been so many legislators who care passionately about this issue, who have helped move this forward. And I want to thank each and every one of them for their leadership, as well as the entire General Assembly for their unanimous support of tackling this issue. Everyone here wants to send three messages. To the victims, like Ms. Linda, we want them to know that we care about what happened to them and that we will do everything in our power to deliver justice for them. To the rapists and criminals, no matter how long ago you committed your crime, we will not stop coming for you. And to the public, to the people across the state, we care profoundly about your safety and will take steps necessary to make your communities safer. I want to take a moment to take stock of where we are. Our inventory of backlog uncovered a total of more than 16,190 to be precise, older kits in the custody of law enforcement. There are many reasons for why this backlog developed. Law enforcement didn't send it to the lab. The lab didn't have the technology that it has today. The legislature didn't fund it. We didn't know what the scope of the problem was until the legislature took action to order local law enforcement to do a count. Local district attorneys didn't reach out to their law enforcement to move the backlog. But it really is less important of how we got here today than our commitment to move forward and ensure that a backlog like this never develops in North Carolina again. And we are making strong progress. We've completed testing on nearly 3,000 kits, 2,965, and have another 5,404 in process. Of the ones that we've tested, 1,055 include samples that can be uploaded into the national database, CODIS. Of those, nearly half, 470, had a hit to either an individual or to a suspect in another sexual assault. 75% of those were to a known individual. That means that law enforcement now has an incredibly hot lead to solve a cold case, some of which have been unsolved for 20 or 30 years. And thanks to this effort, local law enforcement is getting to work. We know of at least 40 arrests that were accounted for 58 sexual assaults in the last year or two. 268 law enforcement agencies have either had all of their kits in the pipeline for testing or have completely eliminated their backlog and tested every kit. And that includes Chief Hawkins' Fayetteville Police Department, which has tested all of its kits and has been a tremendous leader and model in North Carolina for how we as a state can tackle this problem. They secured their own grant and has made 62 arrests thanks to its work on cold case. And Chief Hawkins will tell us more about some of those cases, and some of them are bone-chilling. So as a state, we've made incredible progress, but we aren't anywhere near finished. As we've been going through this process, so have other states, so have other cities, and that means that the demand on the vendor labs is greater than ever. The cost of testing a kit has increased from $700 to $1,245. That's an increase of more than 75%. And it's the reason why we are requesting that the General Assembly appropriate an additional $9 million in one-time funding so we can outsource all of the remaining kits. At the same time, thanks to the Survivor Act that these folks passed in the last session, law enforcement has more than doubled its annual submissions to the state crime lab. In 2018-19, there were 821 kits submitted. In 2019-20, we received 1,853. That is an increase of 125%. And that is a good thing because it means we do not have a backlog, and we will be giving respect to each one of those victims because, as Ms. Linda said, each kit comes from a person who suffered a terrible trauma and then willingly provided evidence, went through an invasive examination of hours to deliver evidence to the criminal justice system. We owe it to them to test their kits. So I look forward to working with the legislature, including the leaders here today, to ensure that we have enough funding to test the old kits and enough scientists to ensure that another backlog never again develops in North Carolina. The General Assembly and law enforcement agencies across the state have made incredible progress in tackling this problem. But we have to keep working together to get across the finish line. I want to thank everyone for what they've done on behalf of sexual assault survivors, and I look forward to continuing our work to ensure that the criminal justice system gives the respect and gives the effort that every one of these victims deserves. Thank you. And now, Senator Representative Bolt.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. As a sponsor of the Survivor Act, it is a great opportunity to be here today, and as Senator Daniels and AG Stein has mentioned the success of this program. It needs to continue. That the test results from these kits provide new life to cold cases, as Ms. Linda has stated. I'm here on behalf of the House to show that this is not a partisan issue. This has been unanimous on both sides, the House and the Senate, Republicans, Democrats. This is a real issue, and we look forward, as far as the House, to push forward the additional funding and support of our law enforcement and our state crime lab and our AG in pursuing the untested kits in the future. And I'd just like to thank the crime lab for what they do that nobody ever sees. So, thank you.
Good morning. So first of all, thank you for the opportunity and the invitation. Just to come and represent the small portion, the law enforcement avenue of what we do for the biggest hero in the room, people like Ms. Linda, the victims. The opportunity to learn from prior issues and to be forward thinking of how we can make sure that we solve crime in the future. The rape kits, Attorney General said we won't stop because the victims are still waiting for us to do our job. The legislatures, thank you for this act. Thank you for joining together for our communities across the state. Thank you, State Crime Lab, because we definitely cannot do it without you. Even when we present urgent cases that are happening real time now, but however long the cases are, we want to tell you we will not stop working until they are treated, the victims are treated as if they were ourselves. Thank you for this opportunity once again, for this Survivor Act bill, so that we can continue to be the leaders. So North Carolina can be the leaders for the nation on how we can eradicate this issue for any other state, and we can continue to solve cases, and we can continue to represent the victims. Some think we've forgotten and know that we haven't. Our hearts are there with you. That is our why. You are our why we do this, why we stand in the gap. So thank you again for this opportunity.
Thank you, Chief, and thank you for being here today. So I guess we're willing to take questions from the press, and maybe that we have to get one of our experts to respond. But Gary?
Yes, thank you. It said, the information provided by the Attorney General says that about 5,400 testing kits are in process. And I think maybe the public would think, well, why would it be in process? How long do the completion of the evidence takes? Could someone describe that? Like, because it would seem to me all you have to do is just test the DNA and it'd be done.
Yeah, I can do that. Thank you, Gary. Yeah, in process means that the local law enforcement has done the analysis and determined it is a kit eligible for testing. Because if it was an unfounded case or somebody didn't file a police report, we are not supposed to send those on. So that work has to be done. And then they get approval from us to ship it to the vendor, and then it's in line with the vendor. The vendor, it has tremendous demand, and there's only so many it can test in a month. And if we get this funding from the General Assembly, our hope is that in 2 years, in May of 2023, every eligible test kit will have been examined. But it takes some time for them to just get to it in line. The actual science itself, you're correct, doesn't take that much time.
I think on the funding side, the General Assembly knew when we appropriated our first $6 million that this was kind of just the first round, that we weren't gonna accomplish all of the testing, and we're gonna have to revisit it in the future. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
So at the bottom, you note that there are a number of cases that came in within the last 2 years. How exactly are you prioritizing testing? Are you looking at the old ones first or the ones that are coming in currently?
Josh?
There are actually 2 tracks. There are kits that existed before 2018, and those are the old ones, and those are the ones being outsourced to the vendor lab. And those are being done basically as agencies do the analysis and determine, okay, we're ready to have ours shipped off, and then we ship them as quickly as we can. In terms of newer cases, anything more recently in the last 2 years, those go straight to the crime lab and are handled just as current crime scene evidence in any case is handled. Unfortunately, this is, the crime lab director, Vanessa Martinucci, is here, and her team has done an incredible job, and technology in all disciplines is getting better. And so we are able to identify culprits with evidence today that even 5 years ago, we wouldn't have been able to identify a suspect. And that means that law enforcement knows that and are sending us more pieces of evidence, even from the same number of crimes. We're getting more evidence submissions from each case that, I forget what the increase is, 45% or something in the last few years. And so another request we have to the General Assembly for their consideration is an additional 12 scientists, half of them in DNA, but half of them in all other disciplines, because the demand on the crime lab services is so great. And the crime lab, what the General Assembly has done with our crime lab isn't common necessarily across the country. What we've said is to local law enforcement, this is a service the state will provide to local law enforcement for free. So if you have a crime that occurs in your community and you collect evidence from that, send it to the crime lab, and you don't have to pay for that service. The state will bear that cost for all communities in North Carolina, and I think it's a great model. The problem is they're doing such a good job. We're getting more evidence submissions than ever, and so we need more help.
Gary?
This is probably for Josh again. So the 9 million that you're seeking, is it for both tracks or just for the vendor track?
Just the outsource. So we have a request for $9 million in one-time money to outsource all of the kits that we think are eligible for testing. And we think that's about a 2-year time period to get them all done. And then we have an additional request for some scientists, which would be a recurring expense.
Was that in the governor's budget, or?
I believe that it was. Yeah, but it was in the governor's budget, yeah. I think
You requested money for 6 scientists.
6 scientists for DNA, but an additional 6 scientists for other disciplines.
And I just want to clarify something that I believe you said. Did you say that the cost of these tests have gone up by 75%?
That's correct.
And that's just in the past year?
Yes, we had a contract with our vendor lab that expired last June, and then we put out a new RFP, and the new RFP, the best price was 75% higher than the one we had been operating under the prior couple of years.
Why is that?
Because this is a problem that exists across the country, and so states all across the country are trying to outsource their kits, and an issue of increasing demand and static supply, prices go up.
I imagine there has to be some concern even on your end, just to make sure that, you know, in the future, these prices aren't going to continue to rise.
Well, our hope is in the future we never need to outsource kits again, because what we want to do, and what the legislature did with the Survivor Act, was they said, going forward, law enforcement within 45 days of reported sexual assault shall automatically send the kit for testing to an accredited crime lab, which 9 times out of 10 is the state crime lab. And so if we can ensure that we never have another backlog, then we won't have to outsource any more kits.
Any other questions? Just now.
Talking about the ones that were sent to the national database, why do only some of them go to the national database and not all?
When we get the DNA profiles back from the vendor lab, not all of them have enough markers to meet the CODIS requirements for uploading into the system. There has to be a certain percentage so that they have more confidence that it actually is going to be connected to the right person. And sadly, not every DNA sample that is collected do we get a sufficient profile for upload. And Vanessa, when I say anything wrong, you just tell me that.
You appear to be coached well. And the General Assembly, in addition to just, let's call it throwing money at the problem, we are looking at other ways to help the crime lab do their testimony more efficiently through remote means, because a lot of the time that their scientists incur is traveling from courthouse to courthouse. So we're looking at ways to address that from a different angle as well. Any other questions?
Did you guys have a press release or anything? Because I know you had a lot of numbers.
It's right there.
Okay. Journalists and numbers, we don't like each other. So, all right, thank you.
All right, well, if
Sorry, I do. This is kind of in the same vein, so that's why I'm asking it. So there's a issue statewide with sexual assault nurse examiners. How exactly are you addressing that? There's no one really keeping track of these nurses. We've reached out to all of the hospitals. So what are you going to do to address that, to make sure that there are people available to actually do these kits?
So, I mean, Josh may have his own answer, but I've said nobody's mentioned that issue to me until this moment. So, legislature can only work on issues that we're aware of. And so I don't know if Attorney General Stein has additional thoughts, but
Yeah, I mean,
we can look at.
there's no question that sane nurses, sexual assault nurse examiners are best practice because they are specially trained in how to effectively do the examination, to collect the evidence, both from an evidence collection standpoint, but also the psychological well-being of the victim. And so our belief is that all major hospital systems should have certified sane nurses on staff, and it's something we would be open to looking towards a requirement to that, to achieve that.
One area the state might be able to help in that is, if there's some assistance that hospitals need in providing training for that expertise, we might be able to look into something along those lines. If there's no other questions, I want to thank all our panelists for coming today, and thank you for attending, and adjourn. Thank you.
Thank you.
Truly, they have